Well, everybody, welcome to the Harvey and Andrew Show. This is our pilot episode that we have put together, and it's entitled, Could We Have Seen It Coming? Now, what this is all about is Harvey and I are here to have a look at supply chain compromise. And the reason for us putting this whole series together over the next sort of 6 to 12 months is we want to have a look at various organizations that have been compromised by their supply chain. And the reason for doing this is we speak to a lot of companies that have to look at their supply chain. It's required by regulation for them to do so. And we get the distinct feeling that they're following the regulation, but they're not entirely sure exactly what they're looking for. So we decided to put this show together, a little podcast, go through some compromises, discuss them, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to everybody out there. So quick introduction. My name's Andrew Brown. I'm the CTO of Elasticito. We specialize in supply chain, cyber risk, and threat. Harvey, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Harvey. I am the cyber engineer here at Elasticito. So today we are going to be talking around three breaches in particular. These are three different types of breaches, and we're going to look at each one of them from an open source intelligence point of view, what we could have seen beforehand, what we see afterwards, and really, could we have predicted this with the questionnaires, like Andrew said? And if not, what do we need to be doing, and how can we prepare for these?
Great. So let's have a look at our first example here, not particularly picking on the University of Nottingham here, but the interesting thing is the Oracle PeopleSoft 0-day, which affected plus minus 100 organizations to begin with. So obviously a lot more than 100 organizations make use of PeopleSoft, but seeing as this is a SaaS application, it was actually the SaaS application that had the 0-day, okay? If we have a look at the timeline here, which is the most important thing as to what's going on, to begin with, on the 27th of May, attackers made use of or exploited the 0-day that had come to their attention in about 100 of these organizations and started exfiltrating data. Okay, so what then happened around about the 9th of June is we see that Nottingham detects the intrusion and takes their system offline. Now, let's just examine this a little bit. While that's what the text here is saying, in all likelihood, okay, what probably happened is threat actors, in this case, Shiny Hunters, sent the University of Nottingham a notification to say that they'd actually taken the data, and that's why we see on the 10th of June here, the University of Nottingham confirming the actual data breach of 464,600 records. So as we can see, this quietly happened in the background, unbeknown to anybody, and the threat actors had from the 27th of May to the 9th of June. Now, on the 10th, okay, we also see that, Oracle becomes aware and issues an emergency alert in this regard, and the very next day they sit there and they issue a CVE and a patch the application. Now, we make use in Elasticito of a cyber risk rating tool called Black Kite. And what happens is when these type of CVEs, known exploitable vulnerabilities, come along, what we do is, or what Black Kite does, is they push out a focus tag and they will tag every single organization that they can see and they know and is aware of that is using PeopleSoft. And you can see this type of information from open source intelligence, depending on what open source intelligence you have access to. So the other plus 100 organizations that were making use of PeopleSoft became aware of this around about the 11th if they didn't receive the Oracle notification. And if we look at the 12th of June, CISA adds the CVE to the known exploitable vulnerability database. Now, what we're here to look at in this regard is, let's take University of Nottingham and say, okay, up front, if they were to go down the road and they were to issue a questionnaire or they were to do a compliance check with PeopleSoft, and we look at things like, would they have passed this compliance check? Well, SOC 2 would have been in place, ISO 27001 would have been in place, there would be various other compliance bits of data. So, in all probability, we don't see that there would be any compliance issue in this regard. If we were to then sit here and say, okay, so in all likelihood, what could Nottingham have actually done about this? Very little, okay, very little in this regard, except if they had been doing things like monitoring the logs in PeopleSoft, if that was available to them, and be sitting there looking for anomaly detection and data flows, okay? Pretty much like a tire pressure monitoring system, okay? So the reason I bring in a tire pressure monitoring system, it alerts you to punctures, okay, which is leaking of air out of the tire. In this case, it's leaking of data out of your SaaS applications. And there's a very neat solution that does that called Vorlon, if anybody wants to take a look, in which case that was probably about the only thing that would be able to have notified them in this regard. Harvey, your thoughts on this? Anything you'd like to add around this?
Yeah, no, I think that's really key. I think the overall thing, right, is exactly what you said. From the open source point of view, no, we couldn't have seen this. But like you said, you can, if the proper monitoring was being done, then it could have been detected earlier and it could have been shut down much earlier, because obviously we see that big gap between when the attackers did start to take out data before it was actually noticed. There was other information around the University of Nottingham and other issues showing up, but yeah, exactly. This was a 0 day, right? Nothing could have been seen beforehand, so it very much is reaction rather than detection in this case, and there isn't anything out there that would have foreseen this in the future. In any
I
case.
think this takes us into another area, okay? And it's really around, how would you sort out contractual applications? The ICO is going to want to hold someone responsible for the actual loss of PII data here. So watch the space. We'll probably dig into that when the outcomes or the findings are made known, as to how the regulator actually views this data breach and who gets held accountable for this actual data breach. Should we move on to our next use case?
Yeah, of course. So this one's actually slightly different, and it's taking a look at something that Black Kite did actually notice before the breach happened, and this is important from the point of view of looking at your compliance story, because this breach is actually of SmarterTools, and it's one of their own products, Smarter Mail. So given an instance where this was a vendor to you and they were asked to answer a security questionnaire or fill out some compliance, they very likely would have again passed, because they look at their own products, they look at it and they will go, yes, this is secure. But as I'll explain in a minute, it turns out they had a version that wasn't secure, and this impacted them. So it slips under the radar again there. So what this attack actually was, Right, so SmarterTools has a piece of software called Smarter Mail. Um, and they actually did find a CVE within this, and they published the CVE, they published a patch, and CISA even marked this as a known exploitable vulnerability. So it was known, it was out there, and SmarterTools themselves were telling people to update and updated their own versions, right? And you can again see through Black Kite, we've got that focus tag raised, we've got that awareness, and we've got that alert come through. But then what actually happened was SmarterTools experienced a breach. And this breach was actually through the exact CVE themselves had published and had noticed and were telling other people to update from. And what had happened here and caused this was they'd updated all the instances of Smarter Mail that they were aware of, and they had noted that they were running. But in the testing, somewhere along the lines, someone had spun up a VM running an older version, right? And they obviously hadn't closed this down properly. They hadn't kept track of it or hadn't gone through the right path. So, it's been officially noted by their CCO that it was just an unknown asset, and they didn't realize that it was running. And yet, threat actors were able to see this from an external point of view. They saw the known exploitable vulnerability and managed to take advantage of exactly that. And from there, they've got the first foothold, and it's only a matter of time of moving around inside, and there's the story. So
So really, what's happening here is again, it's around lack of visibility. Okay, maybe some correct tooling. It was all known. It was all seen in advance, but they appeared to have a lack of publicly facing visibility around systems that were operating, which can happen if an organization, if you're sitting inside the organization. Um, the way a threat actor is going to find this is a threat actor is going to find these systems by doing an actual search using something like Shodan. So if I was to go into Shodan and I was to sit here and search for all instances of Smarter Mail, Shodan would give me a list and IP addresses of all instances of Smarter Mail. And in this case, okay, if they'd done something like change the version number to indicate that it was a newer version, that it was patched, and what we had to see was that the threat actors or your initial access brokers were to find an older version, and they're like, oh, look, we found an older version here, okay?
exactly.
This is still exploitable. And in which case, if we look at what Black Kite's up to here, Black Kite's putting focus tags on items, okay, because it's looking at open source intelligence. So obviously then, if a threat actor found it, okay, it's because they were doing a search, which is exactly what they do. The moment someone like CISA goes and publishes a known exploitable vulnerability, what do threat actors go and do? They sit there and they search for instances, or in this case, it's actually really initial access brokers that get up to this. Initial access brokers are basically, people who run scams, people who sit there and decide that they want to, exploit various things. And it's a bit of a land grab out there because you'll have loads of different competing organizations who do this. The idea is they will do a land grab, run a script, grab hold of this after they've actually exploited it. And a number of them could do the same thing. They're then going to make it for sale on the dark web. And obviously the value of it goes up on who they can sell it to and whose organization it actually belongs to. So this one was actually, if we look at it, okay, the exploitability, the real evidence got out there on the 26th, okay, when CISA published the known exploitable vulnerability, and the timeline was very short here from the 26th, okay, to actually them being compromised on the 29th. So, wow.
Yeah, but
Just
I mean, we're
shows this
seeing
window's
this
closing.
exactly. Yeah, we can see this closing a lot, but it's in this case, even though the window is closing, and I mean, 48 hours is getting a short time, but it's definitely uh, if you're alerted and getting the right alerts, it's enough time to react. Now, if you aren't, obviously you're in the dark and that's it. But this is very much they knew they had a potential vulnerability from much earlier on before it was published because it was their own product, but they didn't know that their own vulnerable product was even running. So, you know, in reality, they even had some more time, but just didn't have enough information of visibility into what was externally facing. So yeah.
I think you bring up a really good point there, okay, that's worth a bit more conversation, and that is time to react. If we look at your initial access broker here, your initial access broker, as I mentioned, they're competing against other organizations out there. They want to do a land grab, and a lot of instances like this, what happens is they want to own it as soon as possible. After you've patched it, they still own it. Now, let's look at from the organization's point of view how this works. What happens is when you have to do this patching, assuming you're something like ISO 27001 and certified, you have to go through a process, which means first off, you need to make sure that you've got the alerting capability. So what's going to alert you to these things relative to the product? And I wouldn't necessarily be relying on the vendor to tell you that you've got this problem, okay? Secondly, you now know about it, and let's say these occur on the Friday afternoon or the weekend. Is this your SOC? Is this your managed SOC provider that's doing this? The next thing is you've got people say, oh, we've got a test. Okay, make sure it doesn't break anything and collapse our application or our infrastructure. And after that, what happens is we need to do change control to get it out there. Your initial access broker, they don't have to do any of this. So this requires, a look at your process and saying, can we speed this up and have a lot of this done in advance type thing, so we can actually literally do this within under a 24-hour period, get through this. And the most important thing is like, from the moment you become notified, we say to organizations, guys, you need to patch it or you need to shut it down. Okay, you need a good instant response plan in place around this. Otherwise, you will be compromised. And you might actually you might only find out 3 or 4 weeks later, because, as I said, what happens in this is you patch it, but they still own it, because what did they do? They installed remote management software on it. When they're sitting installing the remote management software, because it's commercially available remote management software, it's unlikely to trigger your EDR tools. Then a lot of organizations have their firewalls configured where any traffic initiated from the inside can speak out. So it talks back to the remote management software server farm, and that's how they can actually end up managing it. No proxy in the way, so away it goes, and that's how you end up owning it. And what then happens is, while you get in there and you patch it and you say, oh, okay, I got there, I patched it, I don't appear to have been compromised. What happens is 4 weeks later, you end up with the data breach because they've sold it onto the threat actor. So in each of these cases, it would be a good idea, if you're having to patch this type of stuff, if the possibility exists to actually install remote management software on whatever it is you have to be patching, it would be a good idea to have a check and run a scan on that asset to see whether there's any remote management software that has been installed on it, okay? And also to possibly check the traffic around what's going on, because if they have installed remote management software, you can easily sit and uninstall it and patch. So a couple of checks you might want to do in this regard. I think let's move on to the next one. So yeah, every warning fired, okay. And this was, I think, a bit of an own goal here.
Yeah, definitely.
So Stryker is a very interesting one, okay. And what we come across in this regard is when we sit and we look at evidence that we can see externally, okay, from this organization is Stryker were, also still are, a medical company in the US, and the Americans said that this attack was done or caused by the Iranians. But if we look back at the information that was available around this breach, what we start seeing a good few months in advance of this breach is we start seeing a lot of in black kite what we call hacktivist shares, okay? And we saw a rise in the ransomware susceptibility index, which is driven by things like hacktivist shares, okay? Now, hacktivist shares contain information about stealer logs and stealer malware. And this is probably the most misunderstood thing that we end up explaining to organizations out there. And what this happens to be is an indication that unmanaged devices are able to access your SaaS application, in this case, Microsoft 365. And if you allow unmanaged devices to access your SaaS application, they can become compromised. Okay. Why? Because you don't know what OS they're running. You don't know whether they've got any endpoint protection on them. You don't know who's using them. So they can receive phishing emails. People can click on it. And the next thing you know, that device is talking to a command and control server. Your employee now comes, in most cases, these are very probably personal devices. We know this from the additional data that we can see surrounding these stealer logs. And these machines are now talking back to command and control service. So what happens is employee goes home, logs into your Microsoft 365 environment, your Microsoft 365, and everything that that employee can see, okay, is now going back to the command and control server. So organizations turn around and say, well, we changed the password, or we've got multi-factor authentication in place. Makes no difference. They can grab the token. They can get access to it from any application. It also says to them, okay, that, hey, guess what? We can call into the call center. We can ask for a password reset. We can try, impersonating an employee, okay, and get a password reset and a multi-factor authentication reset done, because any device is able to talk to this. So what in this instance appears to have happened, okay, we're obviously only basing our information on what we can see from outside, is that the threat actors got hold of some admin credentials, got into the actual Microsoft Intune console, okay, and basically they were living off the land, and they then on the Intune console started wiping devices that were managed by the Intune console. Now, the reason we see this a lot is this is a challenge, okay? This is a huge challenge facing many organizations, especially where you have BYOD, bring your own device, okay? Which could be a mobile phone. I know a lot of people will sit there and they'll have an iPad, okay, or another tablet type device. And now what happens is you have people who've loaded up Teams on it, they've loaded up Outlook on it, okay, but it's their personal device. How do you manage that personal device? Okay, because it becomes quite challenging just to take control of your own data that's there. So what happens when that person leaves? Okay, how do you wipe their Teams, or how do you wipe their Outlook? And it becomes a convenience thing, because, and a cost thing, because you don't want to sit and have to buy all these people devices. So this is where we see a lot of organizations, one, they're very unaware of the risk associated with this, and two, when it comes to try and resolve this issue, it becomes a massive, massive headache. And all you need is one or two personal devices like a home PC to be compromised by stealer malware. And all of a sudden, this becomes well known to a threat actor out there. So if you haven't got your eye and you don't know that this is happening, okay, then what happens is threat actors are well aware of a way in. They'll be after one login, Okta, into your Salesforce, you name it. Okay, that's what they're up to, and before you know it, you've got a compromised SaaS application.
Yeah, and I remember you saying exactly this. It's not even, we had one chat, and it was around the company had looked into some of these, and they went, well, we've confirmed with our one of our employees that they haven't ever actually logged into to one of these platforms from their home device. And I remember you having a bit of a deeper look into it, and you had the idea around, well, actually, it could be a shared password manager. In the office, they're using their home password manager. They're using maybe their personal account on some layer, and it's storing those passwords. They're taking that account home. They're using that account on a personal machine, and even just that is enough for that to be
Uh,
exposed.
Absolutely, you raise a good point there. So, take Chrome, okay? So the person installs Chrome on their work machine, okay? How do they log into that Chrome, okay, that's been put on their machine? Google wants you to log in. So it doesn't really matter which way around you do it. Let's assume they log into Chrome with their work email address, okay? But they're storing all their passwords in Chrome because they don't have a password manager. They now go home, and what do they log into Chrome with? They log in with their work credentials into the Chrome browser. Where are all their credentials? They're in that Chrome browser, which is now sitting on a home a personal device. Okay, so it's really it's just another area that you need to look at and think of as to what's going on. And it's having to think like a criminal in a way and what they can get up to. Whereas a lot of organizations, IT departments, they're doing a great job. They really are. They're enabling business. That's what they're there to do. But unfortunately, there are challenges like this, which they if we go pre-COVID area, okay, what happens is everything was a lot more locked down. Everything was a lot more network centric. Now what happens is we've moved very much into the era of being SaaS based. Everything's moved up into the cloud, and everything's actually sitting there and accessing the cloud. So hopefully these three cases today, the point of us going through these is to show you, I think three different kinds of warning. You want to go through these three different kinds of warnings for us.
Well, I was just going to kind of summarize and say the Stryker attack brings up something as well that was also seen in the SmarterTools attack, right? But in a different way. Again, it's kind of to do with like the cataloging and picking up from maybe who's before you or what's going on around you, right? Like picture it as if you're picking up a large coding project, right? You don't necessarily know exactly what the person before you's done. It might be very in depth, and certain areas work, so you never touch them. And that could be very much the same. And I think it's what we're seeing. Look at SmarterTools. They didn't know potentially that they had this VM spun up. Look at companies, they might look at a number of these Stealer logs and Hacktivist share findings and go, oh, that user has or that individual has left the organization years ago. Their account must be gone. And they go and check and go, oh, actually, it hasn't been cleaned up. Why wasn't the process there initially or whatever? And it's, sometimes it's not always about, okay, that initial alert. It's almost a step before that and making sure, okay, do we have visibility of everything's out there? And do we see all of that?
I think you raise a good point there. A lot of organizations will do that. Oh, that person's left. It's old. Okay. Yeah, but what you're not realizing is why it exists, okay, is you haven't locked down your SaaS application. Okay, so your threat actor realizes this and they're like, okay, look, we can compromise this. Okay. And so instead of looking at, oh, it's old, I don't like, false positive on the information that's been provided and take no notice of it, be aware of the deeper implications. So I think those are three very good examples. We're doing more of these. There's an ongoing exercise of ours. Please feel free to, if you'd like a one-on-one, you want to have discussion around your organization, complete no commit. You're very welcome to contact Harvey or myself. Information at elasticido.com. We're always very welcome to have a chat with you, have a conversation, and share what we know around this exercise. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Harvey, thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Speak soon.